we are in a 1680s house, an original 1680s house, and it is very, very dark. It is so dark because we are using 4 candles and a hearth to light our way tonight. And I am going to try to see whether or not the romanticized and nostalgic view of the past of knitting and sewing by the fireside is actually, possible. We are going to try to be knitting these socks that I started, so we've established the current gauge and we're going to see if it changes at all. Tonight we are in by a smaller hearth, and we are going to be in a bigger hearth tomorrow, both in the same house, so that we can see the differences in light changes and see if that brings any differences. But we are going to try knitting and see if it's possible to knit the way we knit today in the past. I feel like I'm doing this, and I'm really lucky because I chose, white and a dark color. So I can see what I'm doing. But the problem is like if I'm knitting like this, which is how I normally knit, I can't see anything because my hand's blocking the light. Uh-huh. Unless I were to go like this, which is not sustainable. But if I knit like this.
Yeah.
You can see your colors, but your back's gonna hurt a lot tomorrow.
Yeah.
I guess this would be your optimal way, which actually makes a lot of sense because you remember when we went to the Croft House Museum in Shetland and such, and there are always chairs directly next to the fire.
Those were the knitter chairs.
Exactly. I think it's interesting because I'm knitting now, and this is my best way of knitting is with myself parallel.
Well, I'm literally 2 more feet further back from the fire.
Yeah.
And I can't see well enough to knit.
Historically speaking, this would be a lot of candles to burn for one room. And if we had any fewer, any less?
Yeah, fewer.
If we had any fewer candles in here, this is not possible.
So like if you didn't have the candles and you just had the firelight.
Oh no. No, that isn't happening. We are back in the older part of the 1680s house, older than we were last night. Last night was in a slightly newer edition of the house, but this is part of the original core of the house.
This is the oldest part of the house.
Yeah, this is the original hearth. And I have to say it's putting off a lot more heat, despite the fire being exactly the same size as last night, maybe even smaller. So what we're testing tonight is, does the size of the fire versus the fireplace matter? How many candles do you need? And tomorrow night, we will be testing back in our own home in Vermont, whether or not the electronic versus the real candle makes a difference. Because obviously in our own home we can use the real candles. Mom is literally knitting with a candle in her lap.
This is the only way I can see what I'm doing.
I'd say, light-wise it feels like in the room the fires are the same, but last night knitting-wise I felt much more comfortable knitting with the smaller fire. I'm not sure why. I think it put off a little bit more light knitting-wise, but not overall appearance-wise. If you're not working on anything, I don't think it changes anything. I'm seeing the difference only when I'm doing my knitting. What are you noticing, Mom?
I'm noticing that if I didn't have this candle, I would not be able to do it.
It's kaput.
Yeah, it's kaput. It's a remarkably small amount of light.
But we also don't have, that's the other thing I just realized is last night we had the candles also on the mantle. And there's no mantle here. So that was providing additional light from one area.
It is even harder, even more challenging than it was last night. This is really difficult.
So I think this comes to the question I was posing last night, and I would love to know your opinion on this. Do you think that we have an over-romanticized, over-nostalgic view of knitting or crafting?
We knitters who actually think about these things?
Yeah, there's a few of us who actually wonder, oh my god, were they knitting and
by the fire,
curling up with a book in front of the fire? Is that an over-nostalgic view?
I think it would be nostalgic to think that it was an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, I think that to assume that it was just a pleasure, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
So it's work, it's not the hobby we see today.
Well, that's for sure, and of course that would be
true at any time of day.
I think that's consistent with the fact that a lot of this knitting was not done for pleasure as much as for necessity.
If something goes wrong and you miss a stitch, if you're not working with pure white, the chances in this light of picking your stitches back up.
You were saying that picking out stitches last night.
Oh, God.
You made a mistake and you had to pick stitches out, and that was very
It was like pulling teeth. It was awful.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until this morning I could confirm
that it was okay.
That it was okay because I couldn't see.
You would think you'd be able to see the difference between the light and the dark. I'm finding that not to be the case.
I mean, I'm working with blue, orange, and white.
Yeah.
And can I see the orange? Yes. Can I see the blue? Yes. The white is the only distinct color that I can really deal with right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you would want to avoid. Then again, you know, of course, I mean, we're talking this far back. You're talking about natural dyes. You're not talking about a lot of different color options. But of course, you'd have black or brown, and you'd have white, for sure. I feel like the lesson that I'm learning right now is that if you were to know that you were going to be doing a significant amount of your knitting by this kind of light, it would drastically affect what you made.
So I guess that first things first is welcome to my childhood home. It is a colonial farmhouse, and this is from like 1820. So we've drastically stepped up a little bit in terms of when the fireplace was built from last night. But as you can see, it's quite a bit brighter. Even though it's smaller, it's brighter than the one in the 1680 house. However, if we come over here to the candle, this candle is basically, I was thinking that they were, you know, comparable to the electronic candles. Yet the one real candle is it's putting off about the same amount of light as the other four. So I think it really is much more light. It's much easier to work by. I can see clearly what I'm doing. This actually is workable. Now, granted, I am working in one color tonight, but I can clearly see my colors tonight, whereas last night I couldn't. I think that's down to the real flame. I find this very easy to work by. I think I could like we were saying, in the 1680 house, I would have totally gone for light colors, simple patterns, no lace, barely any color work at all. Meanwhile, by the real candle, you can actually do a fair amount, and I wouldn't shy away from those as much. So that's really interesting to discover. I mean, I can knit just as well as by electric light, basically. Now, in 35 years, you're probably going to have a few eyesight issues. But then again, most people probably expected that. But I'm finding this really, really nice. I can work really easily by it. I'd say if you are going to entertain the notion of knitting by candlelight, go with the real candles because they do put off a lot more light. Be careful because you can catch your hair on fire, and I am sitting in utter terror right now of catching my hair on fire because I did not have the forethought to put my hair up. So now that we have the results of our real candle versus not so real candle versus the hearths versus the fireplaces, both more modern and less modern, we now are going to do something really, really cool, suggested by my dad. So, my parents have these glass oil lamps with the glass chimneys, which actually put off a lot more light than candles, supposedly. So here we have an oil lamp. The base fills with oil with the wick submerged and then comes up, and you can crank it here with the flute sort of illuminating the light that you have, which this is called a chimney flute, and it is both deeply beautiful and terrifying. It is putting off a hell of a lot more light though. And I say this with the utmost respect to everyone who wants to knit by candlelight. I will be sticking with the oil lamp. This is so much nicer. Like, if you thought the candle was a lot of light, wow. Yeah, no, this is so much better. Like, I could do anything by this. I can distinguish colors. I could distinguish stitches. I thought the real candle was a big deal, but this is actually amazing. Because, I mean, even if you didn't have the fire going, say on a summer night, this would give you all of one oil lamp would give you all of the light you would ever need. And it's incredible. Oh my god. And I'm knitting on size 1s, which is interesting because, I mean, I could do anything right now. I'm knitting on double points. I'm knitting on a tiny gauge. This is the same thing I was knitting the last 2 nights, but I actually am confident I could unpick. I could redo. I could adjust the back sort of catches. I could make sure that everything is nice and even. I could read a pattern by this light, which maybe by the last candle, but none of the 1680 house I would have been able to read a pattern at all. But in conclusion, I think this is our best iteration of if you want to be nostalgic. And I think overall, while the darkness is beautiful of the 1680 house, I don't think it's your best knitting light unless you are very intentional about it. Now, thank you so much for watching this video. Enjoy finding your oil lamps on Etsy. By the way, there are a lot I have checked. Go find your oil lamp, or your candle, or your electric candle, or your chimney in your house that is buried somewhere. Go find it. Enjoy knitting by whatever light source makes you happy. Have a great time. Now, I will see you back here next week with a new installment quite soon. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to hear what you guys enjoy to do on your weekends. And bye-bye! Life is weird. Weird shit happens.
It's scary. Yeah.
That's going in the bloopers.
Yes.
Ha!